to episode 13 of the TKO podcast. It's been a minute since we've done one. We've been so busy with workshops and all that kind of things. I am really glad that we're doing it with you. I've been wanting to get you on here for a minute. And for those who don't know Will Yarbrough, he was our director of sales when I worked at Fleetio. And I worked with him for a few years. And he is literally the gold standard when it comes to creating a work culture that is inviting and kind and respectful. And so I'm just super glad to have you on. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Melissa. Always great to see you. And it's a privilege to be here. Thanks for having me.
No, it's definitely, I'm super excited about it. And I know that obviously you're not at Fleetio anymore. So you're over at Denim and you have a different role there, right?
That's right. Yeah, I've got the opportunity to lead basically the entire revenue function here at Denim, which is basically everything on the pipeline side of things, marketing and sales development, to closing new deals with account executives, the supporting revenue operations function, and then any strategic partnerships that we may enter into to kind of feed growth both ways.
That's awesome. I have no doubt that they're going to be very successful with you running that ship. And I have also no doubt that you're probably creating the same amazing culture there that you did at Fleetio. So I would love to chat with you about that a little bit, because I'll tell you, I've been, doing sales before, of course, starting TKO for almost 30 years, which I'm dating myself now, but it's been a long time. And I can honestly tell you that that was the best team I've ever worked with. And that was, because of you and Dylan and Matthew and the other great people that we worked with there. But I was curious to ask you, did you come from a toxic environment, or had you experienced that before to where you had this in mind, like, I'm going to create something different?
Fortunately, no. I'd say it's quite the opposite. My first career job, my first real job, was at another local software startup here in Birmingham called Daxco, and the CEO of Daxco was Dave Gray, who ran that company for a long time through multiple acquisitions, and not only had the hard work of building a culture from nothing, but also merging and assimilating two cultures and very, very, very different businesses to be aligned on a singular mission. And he always said that the true long-term sustainable competitive advantage for Daxco was culture versus product market fit, or execution. And so, you think about it, like, that was instilled in me very, very early on. And, we lived it at Daxco. And then I went on to a couple other businesses before landing at Fleetio and getting the opportunity to sort of craft, take more of an active role in crafting the culture for that team. That was really the foundation that I had to build off of. Now, what I would say is that through other life experiences, playing sports or being involved in this sort of group or committee or team or whatever it may be, I certainly witnessed, the toxicity that can make a culture really turn south quickly. And so I think I had some mistakes along the way, or some experiences along the way, that really shaped, sort of that positive side of things. But that's what I have to say thank you for, is that foundational experience at Daxco and understanding that culture really can be a thing that sets you apart.
I love that. And it's so true, because it was my experience with Fleetio that taught me that. So you were my Daxco, and I appreciate that, a lot, because I had come from a toxic workplace that was so terrible before. And I don't think I ever told you this, because it's not the kind of thing you're going to talk about, on an interview. Hey, why'd you leave your last job? Right.
Yeah.
But I had come from such a terribly toxic environment that I wound up on medical leave and counseling like 3 days a week, because it got so bad that I couldn't have a conversation without feeling like I was saying something wrong or saying something stupid. And it was just awful. And so when I went back to work and I landed at Fleetio, I was nervous about it. And I remember saying to you, you said, "What are you looking for in your new role?" And I said, "I just want to work with kind people." And like, you have no idea how much I meant that at the time. It was more important than the money. It was more important than anything. And boy, when I tell you, I could not have landed in a better place. It was like God said, "Here you go," and it really restored, it brought me back to being able to function again at the level that I used to. And I appreciate that more than you'll ever know.
Well, I appreciate you saying that. And, what I'd say two things is, one, you are as much a part of building that culture as anybody in a leadership position might have been. And I believe that, culture has to be set at the top. You're not going to have a good culture without good leadership all being aligned on what it should look like, but it's got to be built from the bottom. So Whether you're a front desk secretary or an SDR or an AE or a support rep, whatever it might be, you may think that you're just a cog in the machine or a row on a cell in a spreadsheet or something like that. But you're absolutely instrumental in building the culture that company or that organization represents. And then I'd say too, like, good culture is really, really hard. It's a whole lot easier just to focus on results, and it's a whole lot easier to scare people into losing their job. But when you can have someone that you don't mind if they go on a week-long vacation, you don't mind that they shut down at 5 o'clock, 6 o'clock, whatever it might be, but you trust that they're going to do what it takes to be successful. As a leader who ultimately is on the line for that performance, it's really, really tough to kind of structure the culture in that way. But ultimately, it comes down to hiring the right people that have high degree of ownership and drive, and then trusting them to do what they need to do to be successful.
I never really thought about it from the leadership perspective, like you're saying, where that trust is hard, because again, you're responsible for their performance. So putting your trust in somebody and like hoping that you have the right people and that you made the right hires, that would be incredibly scary and stressful. I never really thought about it from that perspective before.
It's different. And, I think that's one of the big disconnects with folks that, say they may want to be in leadership, and specifically sales leadership, is probably the most binary or objective profession out there. You either hit the number or you didn't. But oftentimes, it ultimately doesn't matter why you may miss or why you may hit. Your responsibility is just to hit. And oftentimes that comes down to hiring the right people that are going to take that same level of ownership, where excuses are informative, weaknesses in the execution, downsides in the market that you're playing in, gaps against competition. All of those things are really, really nice to know. But at the end of the day, it doesn't matter. You got to find a way to hit the number. And I think that gets disconnected. And oftentimes that's why it's so important to have a good culture and good participants in it.
For sure. And I think I can only speak for myself in this, but I think that a lot of people probably feel the same way. Actually, I can speak for others because people have reached out to me a lot to have these conversations, just seeing our posts on LinkedIn. But the culture that we had at Fleetio, that you all created, and that I guess we all created, like you said, it was so kind and so supportive and encouraging that there was never a moment where I felt like, oh, well, I don't feel like working. It's 5 o'clock, like ever. And like to your point, I would take a long weekend away with Caleb and go to Atlanta and go see the Braves and have fun and have that work-life balance. But I also had no problem at midnight on a Sunday being on, with Australia, because it was Monday morning for them and I had a number to hit. But I never felt like, oh God, it's Sunday. Like, I always was happy to do it because I felt valued and I felt respected at work, and it makes a big difference.
Yeah. I'll admit, it was special, and trust me, I'm trying every way I can to replicate it. But every company, every culture, and the folks that are a part of it is very, very different. So you got to find the right prescription for the situation that you're in. But I thought about this when you were talking a moment ago, and I haven't used this so much in a professional sense or setting as much in my personal life. But when I think about like the two sides of the spectrum, you've got somebody that's like really, really mean, and you've got somebody that's really, really nice. I think about Lil Wayne, which is funny as that sounds. He's, if you go and you watch him, obviously he's a rapper. He says bad words. There are concepts in his music that may not be the most friendly, but at the end of the day, like, you hear him talk, or if he goes on interviews. I remember this interview with, I'll forget her name, but one of the morning show, ABC morning show people, he was talking to her, and they were like in an argument, but he never raised his voice. He always, was respectful and used good manners, and was always very, very kind in the way that he, said his message. And I can't remember if he said this or it's just what I observed. I was like, man, it is so much more powerful when somebody gives a directive, says something, makes their point, but does it in a calm demeanor versus like getting overly animated or energetic about it. And I think in some way, I've tried to sort of translate that into the way that I like to lead, or try to encourage my leaders to lead, which is that if you can do it through kindness, it's so much more powerful, because you take the call from an Australia prospect on Sunday night because you were either scared because you have to do it and you're going to lose your job if you don't, Or you don't have the Sunday scaries. You do it because you want to work hard for the team that you're a part of and you believe in the mission of the company that you represent. And those are very, very different things. And ultimately, I feel like the kindness side of it is so much more effective. And ultimately, it scales better. It's more repeatable. The fear side, the scary side, the mean side, ultimately, and more often than not, I think leads to burnout.
Oh, yeah. I mean, and especially like with sales, right? Happy people are going to do demos in happy ways, like as corny as that sounds. But, if you're like a Debbie Downer and you're like, well, the next thing is here and this is how you run a report. Like, I'm sorry, I am sleeping watching this. Like, I can't wait to get off of this call, right? But when you're happy about life and you enjoy where you work, like it comes out and your presentation is better, you're happier, and people want to be around positivity. They don't want to be around the Debbie Downer people. So I would much rather buy from somebody who was excited and happy about what they were doing than somebody who was like clearly just checking boxes off a list. Like, I have to go through this, this, and this. Okay, great, bye. Like, there's nothing about that's endearing at all.
I think I'm so glad you said that, because I think that's so good and such great advice. And it's, everything is a story, and human beings are storytellers. And sure, like, we are here today because you're pitching me a product and I may want to buy it, but I can flip through a catalog and sort of get the same information, but I'm talking to you because I believe like you neither know more than I do, or you're going to be able to position things differently than I could on my own. And so, like, yeah, make it fun, make it entertaining, enjoy the work that you do. And this made me think of some of the best advice I'd ever gotten as an account executive doing demos. Shout out to Catherine Hearn if she happens to listen to this, but she was a solutions consultant that I worked with back at Daxco, where I was an account executive. And this was before Zoom and Google Meet and all that kind of stuff. Video conferencing was rare at best. And so this was just like, I am showing you my screen and we were talking on the phone, but I can't see your face. She always encouraged us to put a mirror in front of us, like an actual mirror, and like make sure you're smiling when you're talking. And it's not because they can see you, but it's because your tonality, your voice inflection changes, the energy and how you communicate changes if you are happy, or at least trying to be happy through like the shape that your face is making. So I think it's a great thing. If you enjoy it, if you're smiling, if you're happy, if you're sort of doing the muscle movements that indicate that you're happy, oftentimes that's going to come across in your communication. And just like you said, I'd much rather work with somebody that's happy and fun versus somebody that's a Debbie Downer or like negative all the time.
100%. That's one of the people asked me one time, when I was still selling software, and they said, what's one thing you do before you get on a demo? And I think I kind of like, they didn't expect it, but like, I put on Billie Jean, and they were like, what? Because every time you hear that, so like me and my ex-husband, like the house would be a mess and we'd want to like get it clean, but we're like, oh, we don't feel like doing it. And we'd put on Billie Jean and I'd see the shoulders start going from the other side of the room. And then somebody's like, and the mop comes out and I'm like, all right, we're ready to clean the house,
Yeah.
But it's, you find something that puts you in a good place and in a good spirit. And you do that before you ever get on a call with somebody else. And it really does make a difference, because and he may be listening to this too. There is a guy named Simon in Australia who bought Fleetio from me. And I'll never forget the first time I called him, I got like the inbound. And I called him and he was like, hello. It was like 2. And I realized, oh God, it's 2:00 in the morning, because I wasn't thinking about like the time zone. And I'm like, Will's going to kill me. And so is Simon, but yeah. But I said, he's never going to talk to me again. And he was so nice about it, because I was like, I'm so sorry. And he wound up buying Fleetio, but it's all about, connecting with people. Sales is one, like you said, the product, the gaps, those are all great to knows. But ultimately what sells something at the end of the day is that positivity. And it's the same thing internally at the organization. You have to sell the company. Like, you want your team to believe in what you're doing. Yeah. And the one thing outside of the amazing product that Fleetio has, because honestly, it is amazing. But outside of that, I really believed in all of us. Like, I believed in everybody that we were working with. And it was magic there. It really was.
Yeah. Well, I think, a couple of things there that I would like to point out, just as insights or learnings that I've experienced is, one, you maybe call it a mistake or an oversight or whatever, but you called somebody at 2:00 in the morning. And at the end of the day, you could look at that two ways. One, it's like, oh my gosh, I just made a catastrophic mistake. This person's never going to talk to me again. We already know the end of the story here because you just told it. But the other way you can handle that is like, I'm a human being, you're a human being, I made a mistake. You recognize we're on different sides of the planet. So this makes sense. Don't hold it against me. Let's talk tomorrow. And you know, some version of that story is ultimately what played out, because they became a customer and y'all had a great relationship. Ultimately, they were buying Melissa, the human being who makes mistakes, just like Simon. And that connection, I believe, plays a pretty critical role in that sale or that transaction, that partnership, if you will, come together. And I am on the record as stating that sales is a human to human sport, and it takes someone to buy the human being or the person that they're of the brand they are representing or the product they're representing before I'll ever cut a check for a feature or a functionality.
Oh, 100%. And the other thing too is like, however, you're the face of the company the first time that somebody gets on there and talks to you. And if you're like blah and you're not happy and you're, you know, that's in my mind as a customer, I'm thinking that's probably what I can expect if I need support, right? And
Right.
so there's a lot of aspects to it, but the kindness, like you said, it goes a long way in so many different branches of the tree that people don't think about. You know, and a lot of it even is subconscious. Like people don't even, you know, you're not subconsciously sitting there thinking, well, Will's really nice or Melissa's really excited, so I can expect that customer service is going to be really excited when I call. It's just, it's subconscious. It's just what you expect moving forward based on your experience that you have in the moment.
Yeah. You know, I mean, you think about, you know, sort of the McDonald's and Chick-fil-A experiences, and, you know, no hard feelings or no offense to anyone, you know, that may be a fan of one or the other, but, you know, the language and the way that Chick-fil-A interacts with you is completely different than the McDonald's side of things. And I don't think Chick-fil-A has the best chicken on the planet, and the waffle fries are fine, but, you know, I'm not going there for the food. I'm going there for the overall experience, and the human to human interaction, or even the brand to human interaction, is a big part of that. Same thing with like Walmart and Target. You're going to have different shopping experiences when you go into each one of those retailers, and I promise you, the experience is reflected in the price that you pay. And so you may pay $5 for a pair of pants from Walmart. You may make 10 from Target, but you're going to have a completely different shopping experience. And it all has to do with how you feel when you walk through the door, not necessarily that the pants are of the best quality or of the best craftsmanship. It's that experience and the way that sort of manifests and how you feel interacting with those brands or those people.
It's funny you say that because I was talking about that the other day with Publix, because Publix is so much more expensive than like everywhere else.
Yeah.
But I go there anyway all the time because when you walk in, it's like it's bright inside. Everybody's friendly. The people you know are treated well that work there because they're always happy and they're always friendly and kind and helpful. And to your point, when I go into like a Food Lion, I walk out there feeling like I just got hit by a truck. Like, God, that just experience just sucked the life out of me, right? Or I saved $8, but you know, next time I'm going to go to Publix.
Well, have you seen all the stuff with Chipotle that's been online lately?
No, what's
So
that?
Chipotle's been getting roasted because of, I guess, like, I'm not really a Chipotle fan. I'm more of a Moe's guy or elsewhere. But I guess you'll go into Chipotle, you'll ask for a burrito, and they just skimp you on all the ingredients. So there's like
Okay.
memes and joke videos out there. Where it's like they're layered in the ingredients, and it's like half a spoonful of beef or whatever it may be. Like, part of the joke is that they treat you like crap as part of that customer experience. And, you know, I unfortunately, I don't know what the stock price is doing or what sales are doing at Chipotle, but I would imagine not doing as well as they once were, because they're just getting completely raked over the coals online because of, one, they're shortchanging their customers, or the perception of the customers is that they're shortchanging them, not giving like their money's worth. And it's an expensive product.
Right.
On top of that, they're being mean to people. Whereas I would imagine you can get by with less beef in the burrito and a higher price if you just said thanks for coming in, or, you know, served the food with a smile on your face. I think those things work in concert and they can offset, you know, based on, again, it's all the holistic experience of the product, the person, the brand, the website, the physical brick and mortar location, the taste of the food, the smell of the thing, the way you feel when you use the product, whatever it might be. All of that has to come together. And I think that's where a lot of people just get short-sighted, is whether it be like the internal culture or the external customer experience, or the whole end-to-end thing of where a customer journey may take place. You've got to prioritize all of it, because it all comes together in the brand experience that you may have as a customer.
Absolutely. And for me personally, I feel like a lot of that starts internally.
Yeah.
Because your employees are a reflection of, how they say your outside is a reflection of how you feel on the inside. And I feel like it's the same thing when you're thinking about business. The outside perception that the public has of your company is really a reflection of how the people on the inside feel about it. So if you do have that positive, good, kind culture, the public is going to think, oh, wow, they must have a really good culture. Everybody that works here is always so happy. And so that, like, to your point, you do have to focus on both, and they're all part of the same big picture. They're not separate. They're really not separate, right? And it's funny, you mentioned something that made me think of something a little off the subject, but about delivering something kindly and being able to say the same thing, but it's all about the delivery of that message. And, two people that I care about deeply had an argument over the weekend, and it was pretty harsh. And I was thinking about it, and I'm like, you could have said the exact same thing, right? But instead it turned into this whole big thing because it was aggressive and it was harsh, and it becomes a battle of who's going to win the argument, as opposed to let's look at this and see both sides and find a resolution in the middle. And when you are calm, cool, and collected, boy, that does make a huge difference. And when I think about Caleb, my son, Caleb, his dad, one of the reasons why he can be so intimidating when he needs to be is because he's so calm, right? Like when we used to live in these apartments years ago, before we even got married, and these people below us, God, they were so loud. They're blasting music. It was like 2:00 in the morning. Everybody's got work in the morning. And I remember he just walked down there and he knocked on the door and they opened it and he leaned on the thing and he just said, I'm going to need you to lower that, ma'am. And that was it, and that was the end of it. The music was done. Because he was calm, it was a little scarier in that moment. But again, he didn't have to go down there like a lunatic and all that. And, it was resolved. So yeah, stay calm. I mean, that effective communication is critical.
I think it's so right. And to me, this just sort of relates back to where we started the conversation, which is that it's harder to stay calm. It's much easier just to fly off the handle or yell or bang your fist on the desk or whatever, but it takes willpower and restraint to not do that, and to think intentionally and deliberately about the words you're going to use and how they're going to be said. And most importantly, how the other side is going to interpret it. And similar to your experience with Caleb, I mean, I'm going through the same thing with my kids too, or, my daughter feels like somebody doesn't like her at school. And so I ask her to run me through the situation. I'm like, well, that's just the way you perceived that. I don't think this person meant anything by it. And, these are 8-year-olds. So it's, you can teach them so much about like conversational tactics, but at the end of the day, like she heard what she heard. And I think that's so important to remember, is that it doesn't really matter what you say. I mean, it does, but you know what I mean? It doesn't really matter what you say. It matters what the other side hears. And, again, I just think you and I have both kind of belabored this point in the sense that it's just so much safer. There's so much more upside to speaking in a positive way, in a kind way, in a friendly way, in a calm way than, what is much easier is just kind of being mean about it or short or, overly direct.
It's funny when you talk about kids like that. One of the things that I've always taught Caleb is like, if you're not really sure how someone meant something, just ask.
Yeah.
Right. And that's such a simple thing, whether it's at work or if it's in school or if it's in sports. Before you allow yourself to feel bad and to feel attacked, clarify like whether or not that's even what was being said to you. Right. And I'm sorry, what did you mean by that? Like, I don't understand. Just that simple question alone can just put to rest so many feelings that you may have, because once you start, and this is especially true for people that have gone through like toxic workplaces in the past, once it's in your head that this is what this person meant, you're going to sit there and you're going to think, okay, my job is probably on the line now. You get in your own head and you get yourself crazy, as opposed to just saying like, can you clarify that? Right. So, and everybody's communication style is different. And sometimes people are blunt, but that doesn't mean that they're unkind. They're just very matter of fact. And based on experiences in the past, it can be very easy to misread that and then get in your head. And then you start reacting and not doing your work as best as you can because you're worried about your job. It's a domino effect that nobody really needs.
And it's one of those things too, where, it all comes down to the way you interpret it. And so somebody that comes across as direct or even mean, you just take somebody that's born and raised in the Southeast and somebody that's born and raised in the Northeast. Those folks are going to have completely different communication styles. Quick shout out to any sales profession that has a territory that is, outside a geographic region, you get exposed to these types of things and you learn how to communicate with people from different backgrounds. But just because somebody is direct doesn't mean that they're mean. It may just mean that that's the way that they communicate and it's a bit different. So those folks would benefit from explaining what they truly mean and being explicit in what they mean to ensure that it's not misinterpreted. But exactly like you said, it is completely fair. And I would encourage it to ask, what can you clarify? Can you give me precisely the way you wanted me to take this and what I can do with it? Because ultimately good communication should lead to action. And if you're not overly explicit about what action you want, stopping, starting, or continuing a behavior or a thing, then it's ripe for misinterpretation or mistakes.
100%. And you know, it's funny you bring up the territory thing, because back in the day when I worked at Fleet One selling fuel cards, they had acquired the Hess card or something like that, and everything was getting transferred over. So we had to call all of the companies that were using the Hess card and explain who we were and all this. And so I'm from New York. I should have been calling New York, but poor Brian McClarty, shout out to Brian McClarty, who was from Mississippi, who was calling New York. And I'll never forget him. He walked over to my desk with his hands in his pockets and he was just hunched over and he said, "Those people are mean." I said, "What's happening? What's wrong?" He said, "I called this guy in New York," he said, "and I asked him, how's the weather?" And he yelled at me and said, "What do I look like, a weatherman? What do you want?" You know? And I was like, "Oh, Brian, why are you calling New York?" Right? But the territories and the geographic region. And I'll tell you, like, when I first moved to Tennessee from New York, same thing at Fleet One where I was. I remember somebody said, "You can't talk to people like that." I'm like, "What did I do? I'm like the nicest person ever." And they were like, "Well, you can't just be so straightforward." I'm like,
yeah.
This is me like toned down like by 1,000,000% because I'm in Tennessee. Like, really? Yeah. But you're right. It's just perception. A lot of times it's perception, and not asking or not clarifying really can start a lot of bad blood that isn't even there. It was never there to begin with.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know?
And that really sucks when that happens.
Yeah.
You created a problem that didn't need to exist in the first place.
Exactly. Yeah. And I can't say that there was ever a single time when we worked together that anyone on our team had said one iota of anything that was even slightly disrespectful or rude. There was never a time, not one time in the 2 years that we all worked together that ever happened. So I can't speak to, like, if you did experience that with your team, how would you handle it? Because it never happened. But I am curious, in other roles, or in any role, if you started to see toxicity or somebody that was just being cruel on the team or disrespectful, how would you handle that, being a leader that focuses on empathy at work?
It's pretty straightforward for me. I mean, it's just not behavior that we would tolerate. And, you know, I'm thinking back on a situation that you and I encountered with a potential customer. Maybe it was an actual customer at Fleetio, where they didn't necessarily agree with our take on something. And, you know, I won't surface what that is here, but, you know, it wasn't aligned with the company that we thought we were, the people that we thought we were. And we just essentially said, you know, that's fine. You can feel that way, but we're not going to be the best partner for you if that's how you feel. And I would, what we do and how we behave externally has to mirror and go both ways with how we do things internally. And so I would say, if like you and I were both AEs on my team, and, you know, you called me a name or I was disrespectful to you or something like that, you know, obviously we try to coach and teach and, you know, explain, you know, similar to, you know, our kids, of how, like, well, maybe say this a bit differently or hear this a bit differently. And, you know, make sure that you ask for clarity in this particular situation. And if we can't fix it, then it's got to stop. So, you know, ultimately, if it can't be addressed, then it's something that you've got to remove from the organization. And to really bring that point home, you know, I think the highest performing person, and, you know, I'm a sales guy, so that's the lens through which I see everything, but the highest performing person, whether they be an engineer, a support rep, or a salesperson, is not worth cultural toxicity if they bring that to the table. Because the ripping of the fabric, you can miss a number in a month and you can make it up next month. You can miss a quarter, you can make it up next quarter. You can miss a year and you can make it up next year. But if you start to rip at the fabric of the organization, the culture and the heartbeat of the organization, you may never get that back, because there's so much trust in that. You think about your family and your home, or what you consider your home and your household, and that gets tainted somehow. Like, I don't know, some terrible situation like a kitchen fire or a robbery or something like that, a bad memory that you have in a room in your house or something, that completely distorts how you feel about that place. So I think it's sacred, and I think it has to be protected. It doesn't mean that you cut people out like right as something happens. You try to coach them, you try to educate them, you try to help them evolve, but you can't let it linger, for sure.
You are definitely the exception to the rule there, because most of the time, and I've had probably probably close to 100 people on LinkedIn that have told me they've had the same experiences, toxicity at work, and that leadership, a lot of times it's leadership that's toxic, which makes it even harder because they're really worried about themselves, right? But it's always like, as soon as you bring up something to like HR or to a manager to say, hey, this situation is not okay at work, they find themselves with a target on their back, because maybe the person that is creating the toxicity in the workplace is a top performing rep, or they might be in a leadership role, and it's just easier to get rid of the person who they perceive as whining, as instead of looking at the actual reality of the situation, which is that, like you said, this toxic person is really, cutting at the threads of the fabric that make the company what it is. And the ripple effects of that turn out to be like, this is the most toxic place where we've ever all worked, and everybody leaves, but they don't see it.
Exactly. Have you, did you see the movie Remember the Titans from back in the day?
No, but I've heard about it a lot.
All right. So, Dylan loves his metaphors and so forth. And so one of the things we talk about is, the star wide receiver that, will catch 4 touchdowns, but he's a jerk to all the teammates. And like, if he doesn't get his way, he'll go sit on the bus and cry about it. There's literally a scene in Remember the Titans where, Petey, he's getting coached by his coach. He has a bad attitude about it. He's the star of the team. They need him on the field, but the coach makes the decision that that's not as important as the culture and the way that, that team behaves. So what's he do? He benches Petey. He puts a guy who's unproven in the game, much more of a culture fit, much more of a team fit. And, there's a happy ending, of course, but you just can't make those sacrifices, because performance is a moment in time, and you're never going to scale with heroics. You're never going to scale just by Melissa being successful in a given month at 150% and Will is at 0%. The only way to scale an organization, and specifically a performance organization like a sales organization, is that you and I both are able to contribute in meaningful ways. You and I both are able to find success versus you stepping on my shoulders to get ahead.
The other aspect of it too, that I kind of thought about as you said that, is you're not really doing anybody any favors if you allow that to continue. So you're enabling, for one, right? And that person is never going to realize like the error of their ways. And if they left that company, or say they went on to a different team, there's always going to be somebody who's not willing to tolerate that. And so, but they've never learned the lesson that, like, you're not going to do that here, right? Because no matter what they've done, they've always gotten away with it. And it's the same thing when we think about kids in school, right? And like the bullying, which, you have an 8-year-old, so I'm sure you've seen some of it already. But when it's like the schools don't do anything about it, or workplace doesn't do anything about it, or the sport team doesn't do anything about it, we're literally just creating a generation of more toxic people. And so it's incredibly important for society as a whole that when we see that behavior, regardless of where it is, whether it's in school or work, it's nipped in the bud, or we're never going to change things. And the next generation coming up is going to have a real nightmare on their hands.
Yeah. But again, though, it's easy. It's much easier for me to let my daughter's teacher figure out for her how to have a conversation. It's much easier for me not to talk about that. It's much easier for me not to try to coach my daughter on how to handle bullying or how to take it with a grain of salt. And, maybe they're feeling more than you are. Maybe they're actually struggling, which is why they're lashing out as you. All of that kind of stuff. It's a whole lot easier for me just to look at my phone or watch TV or whatever versus having a conversation with my daughter. And I think that's what separates greats from the mediocre or the average, is that the greats, whether it be in life, in business, in sport, in whatever, are willing to do the things that are just not all the time all that much more difficult, but just more difficult than the easier path. And that can make all the difference.
Long term, though, if we do what's easier in the moment, the long-term impact of those decisions that we made to not really have those conversations are going to lead to a whole big, gigantic thing that is going to be much harder than that initial conversation ever could have been. So, like you're talking about, like the whole company culture is shifted because no one did anything about it. And like you said earlier, you might never get that original culture back. that initial conversation might have been a little harder than just ignoring it, but it's going to be a lot easier than what you're going to deal with later.
100%. Yeah. It's the same thing. It's easier to kick the can down the road than versus like, and it may seem like, I'm just nitpicking. I'm giving Melissa this piece of feedback. Like, it was a pretty good call or like a pretty good meeting, or she did pretty well at this interaction, but there's just one thing I kind of think she could have done better. And it's like, well, I'll give this, I'll let this slide and I'll hit it next time or something. And then you forget versus, you're a high performer, you're a high integrity person, you are very driven, you're going to want that feedback. And instead of like that one thing compounding into a little bigger before it slips away from you. And now you and I have to have a much more difficult and different conversation because I didn't just address the little thing on the front end. And that's kind of a lazy example, but it's directly to your point where if you just have the conversation now, take the time to do it the right way, you're going to save your future self a lot of trouble.
Hands down every time. So I am excited to see how great Denim grows and how quickly Denim grows, because I know that you're there. So I have no doubt that it's going to be amazing. And I really wholeheartedly mean that from the bottom of my heart. Like I said, I've never worked with better people than I did when I worked with you and Dylan and Matthew and just everybody on our team. So I'm excited for Denim because I'm about to see some great things happen. And I think it's going to be wonderful. And is there anything else from a leadership standpoint before I let you hop back to your day that you would like to add about, implementing kindness and empathy and compassion in the workplace, its importance, or just how to do it?
Yeah, no, I would just say you're always so kind, Melissa. And again, you're such a huge part of what we were able to build at Fleetio, and certainly appreciate the support and the cheerleading for Denim. I'm excited about it. We've got a great team. We've got all the right ingredients to make it something special as well. I think that the thing that I would land on and kind of close the conversation with you today is just you just have to remember that we are all people, and people make the world go round. And certainly the world is changing every single day, and the way that we interact may be different. 10 years ago, we may not have been able to do this. We may have to sit down in a physical location together, but the way that we interact is changing. But at the end of the day, like, you have a heartbeat and a soul, and I do too. And if we can remember that and lead with that we're two people talking to one another, irregardless of the subject, if we're mad at one another, if we're upset, if we're frustrated, if we're happy, if we're excited, if we're whatever it might be, remember that there's a human being on the other side. And if you start there at that core level, I'd like to believe the conversation can only go so wrong if you just remember that it's a person. And if you can do that, then I think that will be the best guidance in terms of how you handle most conversations better than you otherwise could.
I literally used those words verbatim over the weekend with the two people I was telling you about that had that disagreement. I said, when you're thinking about how you're going to deliver that message, don't forget that there's an actual human being on the other side who's receiving it.
That's right.
It's super important. Well, thank you so much. I am so glad I finally got you on here. I know you've been so busy, so I'm really glad and appreciative that you made the time. And I'm sure that you and I will be in touch soon.
I'm honored. Thanks for having me, and thanks for everything that you and TKO are doing. So really excited to see what you guys are able to accomplish as well, and certainly appreciate the impact that you're having.